All right, so today we're going to jump into some fascinating stuff from ancient Israel.
Sounds good.
We're taking a deep dive into Leviticus chapter 12.
Okay.
Specifically, the purification rituals for women after childbirth.
Very interesting.
Yeah, we've got a great article from My Christian Space that we're going to be looking at for this.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, and I got to say, some of the details in this chapter are really surprisingly specific.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's like down to the day timelines for purification.
Yeah, like they've really mapped it out.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So, and those timelines actually differ depending on whether the woman gave birth to a son or a daughter.
It's true. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, so the purification time is actually different for sons and daughters.
It is.
I'm already intrigued. What's the breakdown?
All right, so for mothers of sons, the initial period of uncleanliness is 7 days,
Okay,
followed by an additional 33 days.
got it.
But if a daughter is born, it's 14 days plus 66 more.
Wow, so they double the time for daughters.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. That's
Yeah.
really interesting. The article doesn't really say why, though, does it?
No, it's true.
Yeah.
It doesn't explicitly state the reason.
Yeah.
It leaves it open to a lot of different interpretations for sure.
Yeah, it definitely sparks some curiosity. But even without, like, explicit reasons, there are some interesting clues.
Right.
Like, take the total purification time for mothers of sons.
Yeah.
40 days. That number pops up a lot in the Bible,
It does.
often symbolizing a period of transition or transformation.
Like a time of testing or change.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So in this case, it's about the mother's transition back to a state of ritual purity.
Exactly.
But what does uncleanliness even mean in this context?
Right.
It's not like they thought childbirth was bad, right?
No, not at all. It's important to remember the historical context.
Okay, yeah,
Blood, especially bloodshed during childbirth, was associated with death.
right.
And even though death as part of childbirth was, a natural part of life, it still carried this sense of ritual impurity.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like childbirth was seen as this brush with mortality,
Yeah.
both for the mother and for the baby,
Yeah.
and that required a period of separation and cleansing before rejoining the sacred aspects of their community.
Exactly.
So during this period of uncleanliness, women were temporarily excluded from certain religious practices.
Right.
They couldn't, for instance, touch sacred objects or enter the sanctuary.
Yeah, they couldn't participate fully in the religious life of the community.
Okay, that makes sense given their beliefs about purity and sanctity. It wasn't meant to be a punishment,
Yeah.
but more a reflection of their worldview.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just part of how they understood the world.
Yeah. And speaking of timing and symbolism, it's interesting to note when the son's circumcision takes place,
Yes.
it's on the 8th day.
That's right.
And this ritual with the removal of the foreskin also carries this symbolic weight related to death and purification.
It does. You see that theme kind of woven throughout the whole chapter.
It's like each element of the ritual builds on the last, creating this intricate tapestry of meaning and belief.
It's very carefully constructed.
They clearly put a lot of thought into it.
They did.
And we can't forget the offerings required at the end of this purification period.
Yeah.
The text specifically calls for a burnt offering, which symbolizes seeking access to God,
Yes.
and a sin offering, which symbolizes restoration to the community.
Right. So these offerings weren't just about being clean again.
Right.
They were about reconnecting with God and with the community after this period of separation.
Almost like a formal way of saying, I'm back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A powerful moment of atonement and reintegration.
I like that. And here's a detail that really highlights the intention behind these rituals.
Okay.
They provided an alternative for those who couldn't afford the traditional lamb for the offerings.
Right.
So you're talking about the option to offer 2 doves or pigeons instead.
Exactly.
Okay.
This provision shows that these purification rituals were meant to be accessible to everyone, regardless of economic status.
It's incredible to think that even back then they were trying to ensure that everyone could participate.
Yeah,
It speaks volumes about their values.
it does.
So we've got these specific timelines, the link between blood and death, the symbolism of circumcision, and even these offerings that signify atonement.
Right.
But I'm curious, what does this all mean on a deeper level?
Right.
What can we learn from these ancient practices?
Well, we focused a lot on the ritualistic side of things.
Yeah.
And while that's certainly fascinating, perhaps the more intriguing question is,
Okay.
what do these practices reveal about their understanding of women, motherhood, and even the body itself in ancient Israel?
Ooh.
That's something worth pondering.
That is a fascinating question.
Yeah.
Because on the surface, these rituals could seem pretty rigid, even exclusionary.
They could.
But like you said, there's probably a lot more to it.
Right. We have to remember these practices evolved within a very specific cultural and historical context.
Right.
Ancient societies were often preoccupied with purity and danger, and bodily fluids, especially blood, were seen as powerful, even potentially dangerous substances.
So it's not about women being dirty or bad after childbirth.
Right.
It's more about their understanding of the body and its processes.
That's a much better way to put it.
Okay.
And in that context, childbirth, with all its intensity and the shedding of blood, would have been seen as a profoundly transformative experience.
Yeah.
It makes sense that they would have rituals to restore balance and order.
So it's about restoring harmony, not punishing women.
Exactly.
I like that interpretation a lot better.
I think it's closer to the truth.
Yeah. And don't forget the societal role of women back then.
Yeah.
They were the life givers responsible for continuing the lineage and ensuring the future of the community.
That's right.
So maybe these rituals were also a way of acknowledging the significance of motherhood and the vital role women played.
Exactly. It wasn't just about purification. It was about recognizing the power and importance of women within their social structure.
Okay, that makes sense. But there's one thing I still can't quite get past. The longer purification time for mothers of daughters?
Right.
That seems hard to ignore.
It is. It's definitely a point of contention,
Yeah.
and one that scholars have debated for centuries.
I bet.
Some suggest it might reflect cultural anxieties surrounding female fertility and lineage.
Okay.
Inheritance and lineage were often traced through the male line.
Right.
So having a daughter, while certainly a cause for celebration, didn't hold the same weight in terms of continuing the family name and inheritance.
Yeah.
Right. And perhaps that difference in social significance is reflected in the extended purification period. It could be a way of acknowledging the unique challenges and complexities associated with raising a daughter in that society.
It's a theory, for sure.
Yeah.
And while we can't definitively say why the difference exists, it is crucial to remember that these ancient practices were rooted in a web of social, cultural, and religious beliefs very different from our own.
Absolutely.
Trying to understand them through a modern lens can easily lead to misinterpretations. The key is to approach them within their historical context.
Yeah.
And acknowledge the beliefs and values that shaped them.
Right.
And that's what makes these deep dives so fascinating.
It is.
It's like we're peeking into a totally different world.
Yeah.
And trying to make sense of it.
And in doing so, we not only learn about the past, but also about ourselves.
Oh.
And the assumptions we bring to our understanding of history and culture.
That's really good. We've talked a lot about the possible meanings behind these purification rituals.
We have.
But I want to go back to the text itself for a minute.
Okay.
One thing that stands out to me is the emphasis on atonement
Yeah.
through the offerings at the end of the purification period.
You're right. Those offerings play a vital role in restoring the woman's ritual purity
Yeah.
and allowing her to fully rejoin the community.
It's almost like a formal acknowledgement of the separation she's experienced.
Yes.
And a symbolic reintegration back into the sacred space.
Exactly. It's about reestablishing her connection with God and her place within the community.
And as we discussed earlier, the fact that there was a provision for a less expensive offering
Yes.
really speaks to the core intention behind this ritual.
Right. The option to offer doves or pigeons instead of a lamb meant that all women, regardless of their socioeconomic background, could complete the purification process.
That's right. This wasn't about wealth or social status.
No.
It was about ensuring that every woman had the opportunity to be restored to a state of ritual purity.
Exactly.
It's a beautiful message of inclusivity, isn't it?
It is.
Especially woven into a ritual that might initially seem exclusionary.
Right.
It highlights how important it is to look beyond the surface, to understand the deeper motivations behind these ancient practices.
I agree. It's really important to delve deeper.
And that, I think, gets to the heart of today's deep dive.
It does.
We've gone beyond just reading the text.
Yeah.
We've grappled with its meaning, its context, and its potential interpretations.
We've explored the complexities of ritual purity, the symbolism of blood and death, and even how these practices reflect the social dynamics of the time.
Exactly. And it doesn't end there, does it?
It doesn't.
Every deep dive should leave us with new questions,
Yeah.
with a desire to learn more and to connect these ancient practices to our own understanding of the world.
Absolutely.
So for anyone listening who wants to continue exploring this topic, where would you suggest they go from here?
That's a great question.
What other avenues could they explore to deepen their understanding?
Well, I think one fascinating path would be to look at how other cultures and faiths throughout history have approached similar ideas of purification and transition after childbirth.
That's so interesting.
Okay.
It wasn't just ancient Israel that had these sorts of rituals, right?
Not at all. Many cultures have developed their own unique practices and beliefs surrounding childbirth.
Oh, wow.
And they often involve these same themes of purification, separation, and reintegration.
I bet it would be eye-opening to compare and contrast those practices.
You would.
To see the different ways humans have made sense of such a universal, profound experience like childbirth.
Absolutely. You might even find it interesting to trace how those ancient concepts have evolved over time.
Oh, yeah.
And whether they still influence our modern understanding of childbirth and the postpartum period.
You know, that's a really good point. We might not have formal purification rituals anymore,
Right.
but there's still this undeniable sense of transition and recovery that comes with childbirth,
There is.
both physically and emotionally.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exploring those connections between ancient practices and modern experiences can be incredibly insightful.
It can.
Well, as we wrap up our deep dive into Leviticus chapter 12, I have to say I'm left with a sense of awe at the intricacy of these ancient beliefs and practices.
I agree.
It makes you realize just how much thought and meaning went into every aspect of their lives.
And I hope our listeners are walking away with a deeper appreciation for the complexity of these rituals and how crucial it is to understand them within their historical and cultural context.
It's been a real journey of discovery,
It has.
uncovering these layers of symbolism that we might not have noticed otherwise.
And as with any good deep dive, we're left with more questions than answers,
Absolutely.
which is perfect, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The search for knowledge never really ends.
It doesn't.
And today's exploration has given us so much to think about
It has.
and new paths to explore.
So to our listeners, keep digging, keep questioning, and keep your minds open to new perspectives.
Yes.
You never know what you might discover.
Who knows what fascinating topics await us on our next deep dive.
And I can't wait.
Until then, happy exploring.